Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today I'll be showing you how to cycle from Acton in West London to Clapham Junction in South London. This ride takes about 45 minutes and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey also takes around 45 minutes and requires a change of line, so cycling is a great option for making this trip. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute too, then you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting outside Acton Central Station and we're going to head into Acton Park to use the paths in the park to get south. The paths here are nice and wide and they are shared with pedestrians, so do just make sure that you don't ride too quickly and give everyone plenty of space. The park does close at night, so if you need to do this after dark, then you'll want to use East Acton Lane, which runs parallel to it, and you can then go on the Vale, which we're approaching now, and join the route here. There's a toucan crossing to get you over the road here, which you're allowed to cycle on, and then a dropped curb right here that puts you onto Mansell Road. Mansell Road is a cul-de-sac, so there's nowhere for cars to go on it, therefore there isn't any traffic. Although one thing I would flag is that there is a depot on the left here, so sometimes you can get heavy vehicles turning in and out of there, so make sure you keep an eye out for that, especially during work hours. You'll then find yourselves in Southfield Recreation Ground, which is a park which, interestingly enough, used to be a tractor testing ground for Wilkinson's Sword, which now really only makes razors, but used to be a brand that made all sorts of other things. The company also made more than 2 million bayonets here between 1914 and 1918 during the First World War. Unlike Acton Park, this one doesn't close at night, so you can cycle through here no matter what time of day it is. Although there isn't much lighting in the park, so do take that into account when planning your route. For the next section of this route, we're going to be following Cycleway 49, which will take us towards Chiswick High Road. This is a backstreet route which is marked by signs like that blue and green one on the left there, and another at the end of this street. This cycleway doesn't really consist of any infrastructure, it really is just wayfinding and pointing you the quietest way through these residential backstreets. If you do miss a sign and get lost, just remember that you're heading for Rustall Avenue, which will take us towards Acton Green Common. I've never really run into any traffic on Rustall Avenue and I'm pretty sure that it's quiet more or less all the time. The only thing that I'd change about this section of the route is that, in common with a lot of similar streets in London, when you get parking on both sides of the road, the carriageway can feel a little bit narrow, and if there's a car coming in the opposite direction, it can sometimes be a little bit of a squeeze to get past, for example right here. For those of you who are relatively beginner cyclists, one piece of advice I have for you for riding on streets like this is to stay relatively central on the carriageway and leave at least 2 meters between you and the parked cars. That's because if someone were to open the door of one of those cars, you do risk being smacked in the face, or worse if you are too close to it. It's definitely a habit worth getting into, as one day someone is going to open a door as you cycle past them, so just make sure that you're not in the door zone when it happens. Now, this railway bridge coming up, which passes under the District and Piccadilly lines, was closed to general motor traffic in 2020, and it's a huge improvement and it makes a nice quiet route into Chiswick. But one thing to be aware of is that the route is still used by buses, so just be on the lookout as you join the road from the path on the common, as they do have a tendency to whoosh around corners. Now, regular viewers will know that I usually go straight on there to join Chiswick High Road, but I'm following the signs for Cycleway 49 instead, which takes us around to Windmill Road and joins there instead. As you can see, this may not have been the best decision as there are quite a few cars, but this is the official route of Cycleway 49, so I thought I'd try it out. But I'm not really very impressed, so I'd still recommend continuing straight down Fisher's Lane, frankly. The problem with Fisher's Lane is that it's still one way at the south end, so if you're doing this route in the opposite direction, you'd need to go via Clifton Gardens, which is parallel to it. I really hope that Hounslow Council will put two-way cycling on Fisher's Lane and that TfL will reroute Cycleway 49 down there, because Windmill Road isn't really up to Cycleway standards. What is definitely up to Cycleway standards is what we're on now, Cycleway 9, which is the next stage of our route today. This is a two-way protected cycle track and it's going to take us all the way into Hammersmith. It's incredibly high quality in my view and exactly the sort of thing we should be aiming for on more main roads in London. This part of the scheme was done by the London Borough of Hounslow, and the bit further to the east was the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. We'll see that later. Both bits were facilitated by Transport for London. I think that the fact that the scheme continues between two boroughs is notable because all too often different local authorities don't really work together in linking up their cycle routes. But on this one, it's actually hard to tell when you cross the borough boundary, which isn't always the case. That's probably because the scheme was really masterminded by TfL, and it does show how important it is to coordinate these things across the region with a regional body like it. If you are interested in where the borough boundary is, it's actually here, we just crossed it. It's where you pass Goldhawk Road and British Grove. I've always thought that British Grove was an interesting name for a street, and I looked it up, and apparently it's called that because for a few decades there was an institution called the British School located on that site, but it's no longer there. The name remains, however. There are a couple of things to be aware of when cycling on a two-way cycle track like this. One is the bus stop bypasses, like the one we just went over here. These have bus stops on an island away from the main pavement. That's so that the cycle track can pass behind buses and you don't have to overtake stop buses. It's a good design, but it does rely on you giving way at the zebra crossings if anyone's trying to cross and get the bus or come off the bus. So do just make sure you obey those when you cycle down here. The other thing is nicely illustrated by that red car, which is that cars coming out of side roads won't always expect people to be cycling in both directions, so they won't always check in both directions. So you just need to be careful and be aware of that as a potential hazard. There's also something specific to this cycle lane which will become clear as we get into Hammersmith town centre on King Street, and that is that I tend to find that pedestrians tend to jump into the cycle lane and the road without looking around here. It happens pretty much every time I cycle down here, so just be prepared for someone to launch themselves in front of you at any minute. I find that this is particularly the case a bit further down by the shopping centre, but we're not actually going to be going quite down there today, as we're going to turn off right in a minute and head down Bridge Avenue, which, as the name suggests, runs up to Hammersmith Bridge. We're not actually going to be crossing Hammersmith Bridge today, and at the time of recording it's not open to people riding on bikes, but that's okay. We're actually going to be going under first the Great West Road and then under Hammersmith Bridge. One thing to be aware of that crossing under the Great West Road that we just did is that the two traffic lights on there don't necessarily go green at the same time. So if you get a green, just make sure that the next one is green too before you cross the second side of the road so that you don't get flattened by a speeding car. In this case though, I was quite lucky and I was just able to cross in one go, which is nice. We are passing under Hammersmith Bridge now as promised, and we do that on the Thames Path. You are allowed to cycle down here, but as you can see it is quite busy, so just be courteous and don't ride too quickly or terrify anybody. We're really only on it briefly as a way of getting to Queen Caroline Street just here. One thing that I would suggest is that it would actually be quite easy to narrow the Thames Path at that point there, certainly on this side of Hammersmith Bridge. If you were watching closely when we went through there, you might have spotted that there was a bit of quite scrubby grass that nobody was using, and it would be pretty easy just to provide a little bit more path space and make the whole thing a little bit more comfortable for everyone. Obviously, it would be a lot more impractical to widen the path under the bridge itself and in other parts where there are buildings facing onto the path. Now, for the next stage of our route today, we've picked up yet another signed cycleway. This one is called Cycleway 34, and it runs through the Riverside area of Fulham past Fulham Football Club, and it's a very useful link for us today. Despite the impression you might have got from that speeding Mercedes Land Rover type thing, it's actually very, very quiet around here, and there's very, very little in the way of traffic. That's mostly thanks to historic filters and closures like this one here on Mambray Road, which prevents through traffic from using it as a through route. There is a bit of wayfinding here, so you can see on the floor it says C34 and with an arrow which points you in the direction you need to go. And there are also signs on lampposts which are green and blue like all the cycleway signs, and they also say C34. It is a little bit of a maze around here, although you don't really need to go exactly this direction, and frankly the cycleway route is really just a suggestion. If you do need a little bit more help though with following the twists and turns of this route, which is quite long and does use quite a lot of backstreets, then you can always download the digital map of the route, which I've linked to in the description below the video on YouTube. It's on a website called Commute, and you can either use it in their app or you can actually download the file in a GPX format off that page, and it's a standard format and it should work in whatever app or device you prefer. That will show you all the twists and turns between Acton and Clapham Junction, which is our destination today. While you are down there, in the description below the video, I will also link to the map of all the different London cycle routes videos. This was created by a viewer called John and is kept up and maintained by a viewer called Isaac. Thank you so much to both of you who do that. And it is a frankly great way of browsing the different routes on this channel. I do one every week, and they stretch across most parts of London except where there's no really good cycle infrastructure at all, mostly northwest London I'm afraid. So with that map you can pretty much at a glance see where the routes in your area are, and it links through to the video so you can watch them and see what they're like in person, and maybe you can browse in areas that you're not familiar with as well. I tend to link to other stuff down there as well, so I also link to the Safe Cycle London map, which is in my view the best map of all the infrastructure in London. It helps me plan my routes, and I tend to feed back information that I get on the ground as well to help keep it up to date. So you should totally check that out as well. And also in the description I link to the Patreon of London Cycle Routes, and thank you so much to all of you who already subscribe to that. And if anyone else enjoys my content and would like to help support it, you can always go there and throw money at me if you're feeling generous. I really do appreciate it, and it really does help keep me churning out these videos every week. And of course, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, then you should hit subscribe while you're down there too, and that will show you more of my videos on your YouTube homepage. We are now cutting through Bishop's Park. Unfortunately, this park does close at night, so if you're doing this route after dark, you'll need to take Bishop's Avenue and then a brief section on Fulham High Street around to Putney Bridge Station, which is where we're heading now. Obviously, these paths are shared with people walking, and there are a couple of things to be aware of on this one in particular. One of these is speed bumps. You can see one coming up here. And the other thing is the poor surface of the path, largely caused by those tree roots, which create what I like to refer to as nature's speed bumps. Don't let either of those things trip you up. Bishop's Park is so called because it was built on land that was previously owned by the Bishop of London. The Bishop of London's residence is in Fulham Palace, which is just to the left of that hedge. The park was first opened in 1893 and was extended piecemeal from that point onwards. Now, there are a couple of ways out of the park, but we want to take the route that goes under Putney Bridge, so don't miss this turning on the right here like I nearly did. The path that runs under the bridge is pretty low, so if you're riding an upright bike and or are very tall, you might just want to watch your head as you go through there, and in particular cycle through the middle of the tunnel where the arch is a little bit higher. These back streets take us past Putney Bridge station, which is just coming up on the left here, and we pass under the district line for the second time of our journey today. It's just up ahead here. Of course, we also passed under it as we were entering Fisher's Lane back in Acton. That was actually a different branch of the district line, though as regular riders will know, it's really several lines, not one. Now, I would love to be able to just go straight on here because that's the way we need to go, but unfortunately somebody put a highly exclusive social club in the way, the Hurlingham Club, which not only blocks that road but also has control of the Thames foreshore around there, meaning that you can't walk along the Thames in front of it, which is pretty annoying in my view. If you had £1,400 a year to spare, you could potentially join the club and take a shortcut through the grounds, I suppose, but only if you are also proposed and seconded by 2 existing members of the club and prepared to sit on a waiting list that has been closed since 2018. But for most of us, the alternative is taking quite a long detour around the club's large grounds via Hurlingham Road. Fortunately, traffic is relatively light on this road as Hammersmith and Fulham Council has designated it a clean air neighbourhood and introduced camera-controlled traffic filters. You can see one of those just up ahead here on these big yellow signs with the no motor vehicles symbols. The clean air neighbourhood works sort of like a low traffic neighbourhood, with the big difference being that the council has included exemptions for literally everyone who lives and drives in Hammersmith and Fulham. It is quite a small borough, so it's not as bad as if it was a massive borough like, I don't know, Brent or Barnet, but it does mean that it's not quite as effective, and it's also arguably a little bit unfair and confusing on everybody else. That said, it is definitely a massive improvement on the situation here before, and the road is reasonably quiet. We've seen a few cars here, and yeah, this is probably roughly the traffic level that you should expect when you come down here, I think. Interestingly, Hammersmith and Fulham Council were planning to cover their whole borough in schemes like this one, but they stopped after they did this. The impression I get is that they thought it would be politically very easy to deliver schemes like this one with a residence exemption, but they still got a load of people complaining for whatever reason. So the borough-wide project seems to be on ice for now. I do sort of hope that they resurrect it, but frankly it would just make sense to do a proper low traffic neighbourhood. After all, when we cycled down Fulham Riverside, that had proper physical filters that had been there for literally decades, that worked really, really nicely and that no one was complaining about. Next up, we are crossing Wandsworth Bridge. This bridge currently has a pavement level cycle lane in this direction. Don't miss the dropped curb to join it here, or you'll be on the carriageway for the duration. In the other direction, you can probably just about make out that there's a wand segregated cycle lane, which works pretty fine. My understanding is that Wandsworth Council is planning to put proper protected cycle lanes on this bridge in both directions, possibly this year, 2025, or maybe next year. I've not seen the design, but it sounds pretty promising. I hope that the changes sort out the northern junction that we join the bridge on though, as it's currently a bit wide open and not ideal. You do have to make a pretty scary right turn, which we just did. At the end of the bridge there's a bit of shared space as we approach Wandsworth roundabout, possibly one of the least lovely public spaces in the whole of London. We use the toucan crossings to get over here, although there are underpasses which you can use. I kind of prefer the toucans, to be honest, as they drop you straight onto this nice blue cycle lane. We're going to take this up Trinity Road very briefly, but don't miss the turn off left up the hill to Nantes Close. Technically, this path that we're taking up the hill just here is for cycles only and not pedestrians, but in practice plenty of people will walk down there, and there's good reason, as the pedestrian way is steps, and if you've got a buggy or are less able to use steps, you might need a ramp. So just be courteous to everyone on there and, give them plenty of space, especially if they look like they're struggling. Like other streets we've been on, Nantes Close is a cul-de-sac, so doesn't really have any traffic on it, but we're going to turn off it and go through this quite nicely paved and greened section under the Southwest Main Line before taking a little run on Tours Passage and then turning onto Winter Street. If you look on the left there, you'll see a little blue sign with a bike on it pointing you down Maysoul Road. That's because while this isn't an official TfL cycleway, it was part of the old London cycle network, which was laid out back in the 1980s and 1990s. Another sign that it was part of it is this little green cycle track on the end, which is really typical of the infrastructure that you tended to get. That old network was of incredibly variable quality, usually pretty low quality in fact, but there are some bits like this which are still useful today. A lot of the time these routes are basically completely forgotten about and new building work often disrupts them. So for example here, there's not actually a dropped curb to go straight on, you have to weave to the parking in order to follow it. I also think that this ramp here should probably be about 3 times as wide as it actually is, which would be a lot more comfortable given it's shared with pedestrians and cyclists as well. We are nearly there now. We really just have one little ride down Winstanley Road here and then take a left on Grant Road and you'll find yourself right in front of the back entrance of Clapham Junction station. Note that there is a bit of bike parking there on the right which you can use if you need it, and there is also a Boris bike rank nearby, although you probably wouldn't be using that if you were coming from Acton, so maybe that's not super relevant for this route. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Do let me know what you think of it in the comments. I'm particularly interested if anyone has any adjustments. As you can see from the map, it's actually really direct. That Hurlingham Club detour does stand out on the map quite a bit though. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the like button. It does help boost the video in the YouTube algorithm so that other people find it. And if you like what we're doing on the channel, make sure you hit subscribe so that you see future videos in your YouTube feed. Also, thanks once again to all of you who subscribe to the Patreon and keep the channel going. I really appreciate it. And if you don't already do so and value this channel and want to support it, you can always throw money at me in the link in the description below the video to the Patreon. I will see you guys all again next time and in the comments below. Goodbye.